Hey, good day, folks. Welcome back to the Profitable Sheep and Goat Production Podcast. This is episode 28, and it's part two of a discussion we had on our last episode. This two-part episode, we are covering our fall lambing results here at LC Ranch and Glenbrook Farms. Matt and I are discussing how things went for us. And also in this episode, we are basically discussing the results of the laparoscopic AI that Matt did on his farm there this summer. The episode got pretty long, so we decided to split it into two parts. And we also got into the weeds a little bit discussing epigenetics. So we hope you folks enjoy this episode. And if you did not listen to episode 27, I would suggest you go back and listen to that one first. Thanks. And with that, we will jump right in where we left off on the previous episode.
When we're done with the fall lambing, I'd also like to talk about our AI program we did.
That's what I was going to ask you. How did those percentages look against your natural bred?
Pretty good. Now, keep in mind, those were our Katahdin ewes that we've bred 4 years already. We've had them on accelerated program, and we kind of picked our best ewes out for that program as well. But our conception rates on AI was 65%, which is pretty good for, especially for springtime AI. I was pleased with that. So actually those conception rates were higher than our overall conception with natural breeding, but that's a skewed number because those ewes were ewes that were selected for our program for a number of years already, and some of our better ewes too. Like there's no yearlings or anything in there.
Right.
And we had good lambing percentages out of them. They were right up with everything else as far as lambing percentages go. But yeah, it was an interesting program. I definitely, when we do it in the future, it's going to be very strategic. Like we're trying to accomplish this because it's expensive. It's also very time consuming. Like the protocol that I had on those ewes, like we bred, I think 60 ewes, I think it was. And they had them split up in 3 different groups. And the one group, as an experiment, the one group we were using fresh semen. Like we collected around that morning and used that semen to see how those conception rates compared to using frozen semen. And I forget exactly what those numbers were, but they were a little better with fresh semen, which is what we expected. But what I wanted to say is the ewes that were to be bred with fresh semen were on a different protocol than the ewes that were on frozen semen. So we had 2 groups of ewes to be bred on frozen semen and 1 group on fresh semen. And so they're on this protocol of that so many hours before you give them this shot. So many hours, or like I think the first one started like a week before you give them this shot and turn the teaser ram in, something like that. And then, but like it intensified as you get up to it. Like the day before, it's like, so at 2:00 I got to pull cedars from this group and turn the teaser ram in. 3:00 I got to give this group a shot. 3:00 the next morning I got to give this. Like it's a whole program, and it's pretty intense. it's a lot to keep track because the ones that were on fresh semen, the protocol was different, so the time frames weren't the same. So it wasn't just stacked like, okay, at this hour I do this to this group, an hour later I do that to that group. So yeah, it's a lot of work getting ready for it up ahead, and then the day of, you need a bunch of help to flip those ewes over, get them on the breeding tables, roll them around, trim up their bellies where you're going to do the AI, the laparoscopic, and um, then process those ewes once it's done. I think we had like 5 or 6 people helping, and we could have probably used another one. Plus, the vet it was her and 2 of her helpers, so it's a intense program. Um,
Yeah.
but I definitely do it again. I mean, the cool thing was, um, we didn't have a lot of time ahead of time to buy semen from different farms and so forth. Like I said, it was more of an experiment, but we did buy semen from 2 different rams. One was in Michigan and the other one was in Iowa. Neither of them were rams that were for sale, but I could buy semen on them and use it in my flock and try it out. And um, at least the one ram was one that had sold for quite a bit of money at the expo. I was kind of interested in it there, but then instead of buying that ram, I was able to just buy semen on him and um, be able to have some of his genetics in my flock with less money input. I mean, there's definitely that kind of thing. I think is what gets me excited about it, and I always struggle to buy in rams. It I don't know. It always seems they're never quite what you thought. So the idea of being able to just buy in semen from a couple different really good rams that you probably definitely couldn't afford to buy all of them. But instead of buying those really good rams, maybe buying in some semen, and now I have those genetics in my flock, and I can try them out. I can see what they do. I can produce, sons and daughters of those, and outcross that way. So.
And from a biosecurity aspect, it's a very, very low risk
Yeah, yeah,
bringing something in.
yeah,
And so you were able to bring in some outside genetics, but you also were able to use semen from some rams that you had but died. Yeah, that's
yeah, yeah. We have, well, actually, yeah, we have some semen frozen from our rams that we used. One that died on us since then, and also one that actually on the white dorper. I had a white dorper ram. I was getting too many daughters out of him, so I sold him last summer. But I had semen collected him before I sold him, so I used his semen this spring to breed some ewes to him that weren't related to him. So if you have a ram like that where you're kind of done with them, but you still kind of, maybe I want to go back to these genetics. You can collect them, sell them, and then we have the semen on storage. If we want to use it in the future, we can. It's not that expensive to store it. We store it with a lab, and they take care of everything. And so yeah, that's really cool. I do think so. Some of my idea of doing it in the springtime was, one, it's not a busy time for the vet, because the vet that did this also does a lot of deer, and they do a lot of show lambs and goats. So like from, I forget what she told me, from I think like July already, the whole way through September, October, even into November, they're just booked solid. I mean, they're just going. Um, so that was one reason I went with the spring breeding. The other one was I'm seedering these ewes anyway for spring breeding, and doing PG 600. So like I'm putting some of that cost in, and that's things you're going to have to do for AI. So I'm kind of saving that cost. Uh, so that was kind of my reasoning with it. I think in the future we'll probably do it in our late fall group, because that'll be their peak season. So I think we'll get much better conception rates, because even with that program we had these ewes on, I doubt that all those ewes were cycling. Like I'm gonna guess, the the 35% that didn't breed, some of those weren't cycling, and that's why they didn't take. So I think when we do it in the future, I'll do it on our late fall, like our December breeding group. By that time, the vet's a little bit slower, and it would be in the sheep's peak season. So I don't know. I think we might get better conception rates, because that's, the other thing. The cost to breed them, I think, was around $50 a ewe, which, at plus semen, if you're buying in semen, which doesn't sound that terrible. But then when you get a 65% conception rate, you're up to a cost per ewe that lambed of, $75, $80 per ewe, whatever. So definitely, if we can get those conception rates up a little bit, it'll help.
You also have your cost of your drugs to prep them, though, right?
Right. Yeah, that the $50 per ewe was just what the vet charged me. So yeah, I had my protocol on top of that, which wasn't that much more expensive than a regular Cedar PG 600. I mean, it was more, but not terribly. I'd have to look what that was.
So you have your drug costs for prepping, you have your vet, your vet charges for the laparoscopic surgery plus the semen.
Plus semen. Yeah. And, semen can vary anywhere from, I think some of it we paid like $25 a straw. I think some of it we paid like $50 a straw. So it just depends what you're buying and so forth. I mean, there's show breeders that get $1,000 a straw. I've seen already.
Yeah.
So yeah,
or at least that's what it's listed for.
That right. That too. So yeah, there's some cost in there. The other reason I want to do the late fall breeding is those are ewes that lambed in the fall. So those are some of my best ewes. They lambed in the spring, they lambed in the fall again, and now we're breeding them to lamb later next year. So like, I know they lambed in the fall. So those are usually really, really good ewes. So, but I don't have any plans as of right now. Like I said, it'll have to be a really strategic thing. Like, this is what we're trying to accomplish, to spend that money and time and everything. But it's definitely interesting technology. And then you look at what you can do with flushing and embryos. Yeah, and that gets me kind of excited. But there again, you need to have a reason to do it, because it's a lot of money.
Even would need to be a little more strategic yet.
Yeah.
I forget. I had priced flushing that one ewe we had. It was, why am I thinking 900 something?
That sounds right. 900 to flush the ewe, but then to implant those embryos into a recipient ewe, I think it's like $250 per recipient ewe yet, I believe. So that's what comes to mind anyway.
Right. And there again, you have your protocol you need to follow to flush that ewe, and you have a protocol for the recipient ewe that you're going to put the embryos in.
And the other thing is, like, 900 to flush the ewe, and you don't know, you might get 3 embryos or you might get 20. Like, I think the range is often kind of from, I want to say like 5 to 10 or something like that. No, the vets don't really want to give you a range because it can be all over the place.
Yeah.
But I from what I've heard, I think that's often the range, and probably depends on your use and your program a bit, but yeah. But
yeah, when you have that ewe that you just say, boy, I just need a flock like this.
Yeah.
That's the ewe you want to flush.
Yeah.
Something that has consistency, that's throwing cookie cutter lambs with everything else you want. Something that's consistent.
I think you want to be really dialed in on this is what I'm trying to produce before you do that. If you're still kind of trying to figure out what works for your program, that's not a good time to do that, because you'll make whatever criteria you use to select that animal, you can really make fast progress in that direction. So you better be sure it's the direction you want to go. And I'd be careful with, I'd want to be careful with putting all my eggs in one basket, so to speak. You still want some diversity in your flock, because I'm sure down the road something's going to come up that this perfect animal you thought you had is not going to look so perfect anymore. So I think that would be my hardest part, would be picking that ewe to do that with. Like, there's definitely some ewes in my flock that I'm just like, man, these are what I want. But when you really start digging in it, and if you have enough of different data you're tracking and criteria you're looking for, it gets really hard to actually find a perfect, well, there's no such thing as a perfect animal, but something that's worthy to do that. So
there's always a hole somewhere.
Yeah.
And when you look at the data, it seems like
where the embryo thing gets really exciting, I think, is, so we were talking about being able to buy in semen to use in your flock without bringing in rams. Well, when you do that, half of those lambs are still your genetics. If you buy in embryos, so like, say I go to you and I say I want embryos from this ewe and this ram, and I buy those embryos from you, bring them in and put them in one of my ewes, that lamb is totally, if our flocks are unrelated, that lamb is totally unrelated to my flock. I can use them on any ewe in my flock and not have to worry about inbreeding. That's, yeah. On the embryo part, that looks interesting, at least, because I could say, hey, if you're doing some flushing, breed this ewe to this ram, and I'll buy 5 embryos, or I'll buy whatever embryos you get out of them, and then I might get 3 rams out of that mating from you that are unrelated to my flock, but they're born in my flock, they're raised in my flock, and I can pick which one I like the best out of those 3. In our commercial systems, that at least looks like a really good approach, if we can, get to where that's a feasible option.
And you're still maintaining your biosecurity, your closed flock, basically,
right,
by doing that.
And you're avoiding a little bit of that, like I was saying, anytime you bring in a new ram, he's never quite what you thought, or there's always something you find that you don't like about him. When you're bringing an embryo like that, I mean, I'm sure you'll still have that, but the lambs you're looking at now were raised on your farm, in your system, and you get a better feel for what they would do in your system. So I don't know how much we'll do that here real soon, but I think definitely in the future that's something to keep your eyes on.
Yeah. Then if you really want to get in the weeds, then you can talk about how your recipient ewe affects your lamb.
In what way?
Well, from epigenetics. So
yeah,
I think the beef guys talk about it some.
Yeah.
That lamb inherits, is influenced in some way or another by, they call that the surrogate dam, right? Is that the right? Am I saying that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Basically, the dam that carries that embryo has an influence on it to a certain extent.
It does. And that would be at least along the conversation of epigenetics, which is
I guess it would be
interesting conversation when you start
it is
digging into that. And you kind of run into the guys that say genetics are genetics, like it's a clear-cut DNA code that gets passed on. When you get into DNA, when you get into epigenetics, now you're saying that that genetic gets influenced by the condition, like the genetic itself, the DNA itself gets changed by the condition it's raised in.
Definitely. Genes can be turned on and off by environmental influences.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much benefit that is.
Yep.
Being better than a balled-in one. And I say that I'm talking about a flock that has a program that they've been working on for a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
That a homegrown ram is going to give you more consistency for multiple reasons, not just because he is genetically related to the rest of your flock, probably, but I wonder how much that embryo being carried in that in your environment of your farm, I wonder how much that changes how that lamb adapts to your environment compared to buying in that animal.
I think it would a lot, because he would inherit some of that, like through the placenta. He would get some of the
antibodies. Antibodies from the ewe that is already carrying, working with all the bugs in your system.
Yeah. So I think, for a ram lamb like that, the playing field's leveled a little bit. Obviously he wasn't genetically selected for your farm like your homegrown ram was, but the playing field is leveled for him that he was raised on your farm. He has at least some of the resistance to the bugs or whatever, diseases, whatever that your flock may have. I don't know that he'd have all, but he'd have at least some. So I think the playing field for that ram is leveled, as opposed to a ram that comes in completely from the outside. And that's why I think that's exciting, because, like I said, you probably, if you buy in embryos, you do more than one. So now you might have 3 rams to pick from, and they were raised on your farm. You adapted to your system somewhat already. So yeah, I think that would be huge. But if we keep going down that road, I'll definitely probably run myself in the gutter and in a corner.
Yeah, we'll title this episode Two Dumb Farmers Dive into Epigenetics.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Yeah. Just so everybody knows, we don't really know what we're talking about.
Yeah. Cool things to think about anyway.
And then you take epigenetics and you bring in your EBVs.
Yeah, epigenetics would say that how you manage your flock is going to somewhat affect your EBVs. And I can hear the EBV crowd screaming at me for that statement, but
no. EBVs totally rule out environment.
Not totally. Not totally. They do a good job of it. But they can't, like, if you go down the whole epigenetics path, the genetics and the environment are at least somewhat linked. So it's not completely 2 separate components.
I thought I would just interject a clarification here that I think the terms DNA and genes were used interchangeably some in this podcast, and I just want to clarify that the way I understand it, epigenetics would be a gene that can be brought out or turned on or off due to environmental influences. When you're talking DNA, that's pretty much a fixed thing. That's not something that's changing. It's the gene that is changing or being expressed or turned on and off, not the DNA. No, it's not 2 separate components, but if we say we can turn things on and off, how can we measure it? How do we know?
Well, we're only measuring what's expressed. So The way I see this, so I do think the way we feed our sheep can somewhat, it's minimal, but can somewhat affect their EBVs. And part of that might be the way I, with my program, if it's doing a really good job of producing, not only am I using EBVs and selecting for good rams that way, but I'm also producing healthy animals that are bred and built, fed, whatever you want to say, to go out and thrive in different environments. When they go out into other farms and those farms are submitting data back, and they're thriving and they're doing well, some of that is from their genetics, but some of it is from the program behind them, the feed, the nutrition, the management, whatever. And that's all factoring into EPVs. So you can't completely separate those two.
No, you can't.
Completely.
But using an EBV is the best way.
Oh, yeah.
We can level the playing field.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. But if you think that you're just going to select animals on EBVs and you're going to have a crappy program and those animals are going to go out and do well for other farms, that's not how it works. Now, there is something to, you want to challenge them in the areas that you need to challenge them in. But you still, epigenetics at least tell us that you still need to manage that animal good for them to go out and thrive.
So at what point can we turn something off that's already there? So we talk about being that epigenetics is a gene that can get turned on and off.
Yeah, I don't know that I like that turned on and off analogy necessarily. I think of it as an athlete that's very good at basketball. Some of that is just genetically, maybe his size, maybe his inherent talent, whatever else. But if that basketball player doesn't also go out and practice and train for what he decided he wants to do with playing basketball, he's not going to be the best. On the other hand, you can have a basketball player that's not genetically superior at playing basketball, if you want to put it that way. And it doesn't matter how hard he's going to train, he's never going to get there. It's the same way with sheep. It is how I see it. It's not necessarily a turning off or turning on. It's a combination of they have the right traits, and then they have the right DNA behind them, and then they're put in an environment where they can thrive and grow and express that DNA.
I'm looking up what epigenetics means.
Yeah, that's probably good now that we're 10 minutes into the discussion of epigenetics. Like I said, I feel like I can really get myself in a corner here with this, but it's an interesting topic. And
so epigenetics refers to how your behaviors and environment can cause changes that affect the way your genes work. That's where I get my turning it on and off idea from.
Right.
Unlike genetic changes or mutations, epigenetic changes are reversible. See, that's why I'm wondering what point can you turn something off that was there? They are reversible and do not change the sequence of the DNA bases, but they can change how your body reads a DNA sequence.
Okay. Yeah. It's kind of plays into what we were saying. We're
pretty close to right, I believe.
More scientific matter.
Wow. Well, we better stop.
Not necessarily. I mean, yeah, I get where you get the on and off analogy, but it's still that gene is there. It's just not being expressed due to its environmental conditions or whatever. All this, kind of plays into what I becoming more and more aware of with our raising sheep is it's a complete program. Like, you got to be thinking of the complete system. It's not just nutrition, it's not just management, it's not just genetics. Like, it's the complete program that makes it work. And whatever that is for you, if you're low input grass based block, it's going to look a little different, but you still have the same three pillars kind of. If you're higher input accelerated lambing flock, there's more moving pieces, but it's still, you got to find what works for you, basically.
Yeah. So that's the reason when we talk about the whole program, why sometimes when we see a sheep, we say that looks like a sheep from so-and-so's farm.
Yeah.
It was just this summer, I saw some sheep on Craigslist in a different part of the state.
Yeah.
These lambs advertised.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, there's some nice lambs. And I sent the picture to somebody in that area that I knew. And I'm like, hey, I wonder who this is that has these lambs for sale.
Yeah.
Well, he said, that looks like an LC Ranch or a Glenbrook animal. That was his words.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's why it caught my eye. Just a random picture on Craigslist of these lambs for sale. It was because it was an animal that I'm looking for.
Like you're looking for. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I still don't know whose animals they were.
Right.
But after he told me that, I went back and looked at that picture. And I'm like, yeah, do you know what? It does.
Yeah. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you do. You see sheep out there and you're like, oh, that looks like so-and-so's breeding. Different breeders have different things they select for and so forth. But that's, a good bit of that has to be genetics too, because these are not just directly from your flock. They're out there, in another flock, but you're seeing them saying, oh, these look like so-and-so breeders' animals. So that's genetics carrying through there.
Well, and we're back to that. It's the part of the whole program. It's the epigenetics, it's the genetics, it's the management system. It's what that farmer puts pressure on it because that's what he's trying to build.
And that's something that some of the early NSIP breeders missed, were they thought we have these EBVs, like this is our program. Genetically, it makes sense. You're selling genetics. This is the best way to gauge your genetics. This is our program. And that's why some people didn't like NSIP in the start, is some of those breeders did not recognize the need for the whole program. And there was other breeders at that time that maybe didn't buy into the NSIP thing, but they were doing really good at breeding sheep. Like, they had a good complete program. Maybe genetically they didn't have that NSIP tool to help them make the genetic selection. But they were doing much better job with their complete program. So it turned some people off to NSIP. And I think, it's definitely got a lot better with most NSIP people now recognizing that's only part of the program. It's not the whole system.
Yeah. Well, before we get in the weeds any farther, we better wrap this up.
Sounds good.
Or we'll have to put a bunch of big disclaimers in here.
Yeah. Well, they ought to. I think by now our listeners probably figured out if you and me get to rambling on, maybe take it for what it's worth. It's free information, and it's probably worth exactly that.
Well, right, and this is how Matt and I figure stuff out.
Yeah.
So, hey, nice chatting again, and we'll catch up with you next time.
Sounds good. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks again for listening to another episode of the Profitable Sheep and Goat Production Podcast, brought to you by LCW, your source for universal feeders and Schumer sheep and goat handling and feeding equipment. If you're looking for a good option for sheep and goat equipment or a saliva lick feeder where you can control the intake of your animal, check out our website, www.lostcreekwholesalellc.net. And feel free to reach out to us. Thanks again.